His daughters thought he was a terrible father. Always working, never home, too tired to care. They had no idea he was dying and racing against time to save them.
James Wilson's alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., just like every morning for the past 8 months. The twins, Emma and Sophie, were still asleep in their shared bedroom as he quietly made their lunches and left breakfast money on the kitchen counter. By the time they woke up for school, Daddy would already be gone to his first job at the auto parts warehouse. He'd be back briefly at 3 p.m. to drive them home, then off to his evening shift cleaning offices until midnight. James paused at their bedroom door, watching his 8-year-old daughters sleep peacefully. Emma clutched the worn teddy bear that belonged to their mother. Sophie had kicked off her covers, her dark hair spread across the pillow just like Sarah's used to be. "I love you, my angels," he whispered, though they couldn't hear him. He did this every morning, the only time he could say it without them rolling their eyes or complaining that Daddy was always rushing somewhere. James grabbed his lunch bag and headed out into the Chicago morning. The September air was crisp, and he pulled his jacket tighter as he walked to the bus stop. His body ached constantly now, though he told himself it was just from the physical labor and lack of sleep. At the warehouse, James moved boxes and inventory with mechanical precision. His co-workers knew him as the quiet single dad who never complained and always picked up extra shifts. What they didn't know was that every paycheck was carefully calculated. Rent, utilities, groceries, and the massive medical debt left behind when cancer took his wife Sarah 2 years ago. "Wilson, you okay?" asked Miguel, his supervisor. "You look pale today." "I'm fine," James replied automatically. It was his standard response to everything. Tired, "I'm fine." Stressed, "I'm fine." Heartbroken, "I'm fine." But James wasn't fine. The weight loss, the constant fatigue, the pain in his abdomen. He'd been ignoring the symptoms for months. He couldn't afford to be sick. His daughters needed him healthy and working, not lying in some hospital bed running up more bills they'd never be able to pay. At 2:45 p.m., James rushed to pick up Emma and Sophie from their after-school program. He was always exactly on time, but never had energy for anything more than the drive home. "Daddy, can you help me with my math homework?" Emma asked as they walked into their small apartment. "Not right now, sweetheart. Daddy has to get to work. Ask Mrs. Rodriguez next door if you need help." Emma's face fell. It was always the same answer. Sophie didn't even bother asking anymore. "You never help us with anything," Sophie said, her 8-year-old voice carrying surprising bitterness. "You just work all the time." Ames knelt down to their level, his heart breaking at the disappointment in their eyes. "I know, girls. I'm working hard so we can stay in our home and you can have everything you need." "We don't need stuff," Emma said quietly. "We need you." The words hit James like a physical blow. He wanted to explain that every hour away from them was an hour spent securing their future, that the medical bills from their mother's cancer treatment were still crushing them, that his 3 jobs barely kept them afloat. "I love you both more than anything in this world," James said, hugging them tightly. "When Daddy finishes paying off Mommy's medical bills, things will be different. I promise." But even as he said it, James felt the familiar pain in his stomach intensify. He'd been having these episodes more frequently, sharp pains that doubled him over when he thought the girls weren't looking. "You always promise things will be different," Sophie said, pulling away from the hug, "but they never are." James watched his daughters retreat to their room to do homework alone and felt like he was failing them every single day. He changed into his janitor uniform and grabbed his keys, leaving another note on the counter. Dinner in fridge. Homework first, Daddy loves you. P.S. Ice cream if you finish everything. It was a small gesture, but the only way he could show love when he wasn't there to give it in person. As he drove to his evening job, James caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked older than his 34 years. The weight of loss, debt, and exhaustion carved into every line on his face. At Peterson and Associates law firm, James cleaned offices while the lawyers worked late. The fluorescent lights made his already pale complexion look ghostly, and twice he had to stop and lean against a desk as waves of nausea hit him. "You sure you're okay, James?" asked Jennifer Peterson, a young associate who always stayed late. "You've seemed really tired lately." "Just working a lot," James replied, forcing a smile. What he didn't tell her was that he'd been secretly using his lunch breaks for the past 3 weeks to see a doctor at the free clinic. The diagnosis had been devastating: stage 3 pancreatic cancer, aggressive, fast-moving, and with a treatment plan that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The oncologist had been kind but direct. Without immediate chemotherapy and surgery, James had maybe 6 months to live. "I can't afford treatment," James had told the doctor. "Mr. Wilson, we can work out payment plans, apply for assistance programs. You don't understand. I'm already drowning in medical debt from my wife's cancer. I can't leave my daughters with even more bills." So James made a choice that was killing him slowly. He would work every hour he could, save every penny possible, and try to secure his daughter's future before the cancer took him. He calculated that with his 3 jobs, he could pay off Sarah's medical debt and leave the girls with enough money to survive, if he could just hold on for 6 more months. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was dying from the same disease that had killed his wife, but he couldn't afford to fight it because fighting hers had bankrupted them. James finished cleaning the law offices and drove to his 3rd job, a weekend security guard position that he'd picked up to earn extra money. As he sat in the empty office building monitoring cameras, he pulled out a small notebook and pen. "Letter number 1, Emma's 9th birthday," he wrote at the top of the page. "My beautiful Emma, if you're reading this, it means Daddy had to become your guardian angel a little earlier than planned. I know you're probably angry that I worked so much, but I need you to understand. Every minute away from you was a minute spent trying to take care of you forever."
James had started writing these letters 3 weeks ago, after the diagnosis. One for every birthday, graduation, wedding day, and milestone he might miss. It was the only way he could figure out how to be their father, even after he was gone. 2 weeks later, James's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The pain was constant now, and he'd lost 15 pounds. Emma and Sophie noticed their father looked sick, but when they asked, he always said he was just tired from work. "Daddy, you need to eat," Emma said one morning, noticing he'd only had coffee for breakfast again. "I'll eat at work, sweetheart. You girls finish your breakfast." But James couldn't keep food down anymore. The cancer was spreading faster than he'd hoped, and his carefully calculated timeline was collapsing. At the warehouse that morning, James collapsed while lifting a box. The pain in his abdomen was so severe he couldn't breathe. Miguel found him on the floor, doubled over and barely conscious. "Call 911, Miguel shouted to other workers. "James, stay with me. What's wrong?" No, hospital," James gasped. "Can't afford the girls." But Miguel ignored his protests and called for an ambulance. As the paramedics loaded James onto a stretcher, his first thought wasn't about his pain. It was about who would pick up Emma and Sophie from school. At Chicago General Hospital, Dr. Patricia Adams reviewed James's emergency room tests with growing concern. The CT scan showed an advanced pancreatic tumor and signs that the cancer had spread to his liver. "About a month," James admitted. "Maybe longer." "A month? This is stage 4 pancreatic cancer. You should have started treatment immediately. Why didn't you follow up with oncology?" James looked away. "I can't afford treatment. I'm already $180,000 in debt from my wife's cancer treatment. I can't leave my daughters with more bills." While James was in the hospital, Mrs. Rodriguez picked up the twins from school, as she had many times before. But this time, she found something that changed everything. Emma had forgotten her house key, so Mrs. Rodriguez used the spare key James had given her for emergencies. As she helped the girls get settled, Emma went to her father's room looking for paper to draw him a get-well-soon card. That's when she found the notebook. "I want that too, sweetheart. More than anything. But Daddy got sick and I can't afford the medicine that might help me get better." Dr. Adams, who had been listening to this conversation, stepped forward. "Mr. Wilson, what if I told you there might be options you haven't considered? There are programs, clinical trials, assistance funds for situations exactly like this." For the first time in months, James felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by practical reality. "Dr. Adams, I appreciate that, but I've already looked into assistance programs. The waiting lists are long and I don't have time to wait." What James didn't expect was what happened next. Maria Rodriguez, the social worker, had been deeply moved by the letters and James's story. She made some calls to local cancer support organizations and shared James's situation. Within 24 hours, something remarkable began to happen. Jennifer Peterson, the young lawyer whose office James cleaned, learned about his situation from Maria. She immediately started making calls to her legal network about medical debt relief options. "This man has been cleaning our offices for 2 years, Jennifer told her law partners. "He's quiet, hardworking, and never complained about anything. I had no idea he was battling cancer while working 3 jobs to pay off his wife's medical debt." The warehouse workers where James had collapsed also rallied together. Miguel started a GoFundMe campaign, and within hours, James's story was being shared across social media. "James Wilson is the hardest working man I know," Miguel wrote. While his little girls thought he was just an absent father, he was actually sacrificing his health and his life to make sure they'd be taken care of. He needs our help to get cancer treatment so he can be the father they need him to be. The story went viral locally. People were moved by the image of a dying father writing birthday letters for children who thought he didn't care about them. Emma and Sophie, meanwhile, had taken over their father's bedside. They refused to leave the hospital, reading his letters and finally understanding the depth of his love for them. "Daddy," Sophie said, "in the letter for my 16th birthday you wrote that you hope I'm as brave as Mommy was, but you're the bravest person I know. You've been taking care of us even while you were sick," Emma added. "We're sorry we thought you didn't love us." James held his daughters close, marveling at how much their understanding meant to him. For months he'd carried the weight of their disappointment on top of his illness. Now, finally, they knew the truth. "I want that too, sweetheart. More than anything. But Daddy got sick and I can't afford the medicine that might help me get better." Dr. Adams, who had been listening to this conversation, stepped forward. "Mr. Wilson, what if I told you there might be options you haven't considered? There are programs, clinical trials, assistance funds for situations exactly like this." For the first time in months, James felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by practical reality. "Dr. Adams, I appreciate that, but I've already looked into assistance programs. The waiting lists are long and I don't have time to wait." What James didn't expect was what happened next. Maria Rodriguez, the social worker, had been deeply moved by the letters and James's story. She made some calls to local cancer support organizations and shared James's situation. Within 24 hours, something remarkable began to happen. Jennifer Peterson, the young lawyer whose office James cleaned, learned about his situation from Maria. She immediately started making calls to her legal network about medical debt relief options. "This man has been cleaning our offices for 2 years, Jennifer told her law partners. "He's quiet, hardworking, and never complained about anything. I had no idea he was battling cancer while working 3 jobs to pay off his wife's medical debt." The warehouse workers where James had collapsed also rallied together. Miguel started a GoFundMe campaign, and within hours, James's story was being shared across social media. "James Wilson is the hardest working man I know," Miguel wrote. While his little girls thought he was just an absent father, he was actually sacrificing his health and his life to make sure they'd be taken care of. "He needs our help to get cancer treatment so he can be the father they need him to be." The story went viral locally. People were moved by the image of a dying father writing birthday letters for children who thought he didn't care about them. Emma and Sophie, meanwhile, had taken over their father's bedside. They refused to leave the hospital, reading his letters and finally understanding the depth of his love for them. "Daddy," Sophie said, "in the letter for my 16th birthday you wrote that you hope I'm as brave as Mommy was, but you're the bravest person I know. You've been taking care of us even while you were sick," Emma added. "We're sorry we thought you didn't love us." James held his daughters close, marveling at how much their understanding meant to him. For months he'd carried the weight of their disappointment on top of his illness. Now, finally, they knew the truth. Dr. Adams returned with news that changed everything. "Mr. Wilson, I've been working with our financial counselor and several assistance programs. Between the GoFundMe campaign that's already raised $50,000, a clinical trial you qualify for, and some debt relief options the lawyers have found, we can get you into treatment." James stared at her in disbelief. "I don't understand. How is that possible?" "Sometimes, when people hear a story like yours, they want to help. The community response has been overwhelming. A local cancer foundation has agreed to cover your treatment costs. and the law firm has found ways to restructure your existing medical debt. Jennifer Peterson had worked with other lawyers to file for medical bankruptcy on James's behalf, which would eliminate most of Sarah's medical debt without affecting his ability to provide for the twins. "Mr. Wilson," Jennifer explained, "you've been carrying an impossible burden alone. But you don't have to do this by yourself anymore. The treatment Dr. Adams is recommending won't cure your cancer, but it could give you years instead of months." Emma looked up at her father with hope shining in her eyes. "Does that mean you might be able to see my graduation for real instead of just writing me a letter?" James felt overwhelmed by the kindness of people who barely knew him. "I don't know how to thank everyone who's helping us." "You don't need to thank anyone," Dr. Adams said. "You just need to fight. Your daughters need their father, and now you have the resources to give them that chance." For the first time since his diagnosis, James allowed himself to hope. Not for a cure. The doctors had been clear that pancreatic cancer was rarely curable at his stage. But for time. Precious, irreplaceable time with Emma and Sophie. 6 months later, James was responding better to treatment than anyone had expected. The tumor had shrunk significantly, and while he would always be fighting cancer, he was alive and present for his daughters in ways he'd thought were no longer possible. He'd reduced his work to one full-time job with health insurance, thanks to the debt relief and community support. For the first time in years, he was home when the girls got out of school. "Daddy, can you help me with my math homework?" Emma asked one afternoon. "Of course, sweetheart," James replied, settling down at the kitchen table with her. It was such a simple moment, but it felt like a miracle. Sophie joined them at the table with her own homework. "Daddy, do you still write us letters?" "I do," James admitted, "but now they're different. Now I write about the things we did together that day, instead of the things I'm going to miss." The girls exchanged a look. "Can we read one?" Emma asked. James pulled out his newest notebook and read, "Today, Emma asked me to help with math homework, and Sophie showed me a picture she drew of our family. These are the moments I almost missed, the ordinary magic of being your father. I am no longer the invisible man racing against time. I am present, grateful, and so very much alive." As they worked on homework together, James reflected on how wrong he'd been about what his daughters needed. He'd thought providing for them financially was the highest form of love, but what they'd actually needed was his presence, his attention, and his time. The cancer was still there, and probably always would be, but James had learned that being a good father wasn't about ensuring a perfect future for his children. It was about being fully present for the imperfect, beautiful, ordinary moments of their childhood. Emma looked up from her math problems. "Daddy, I'm glad you're not invisible anymore." James smiled, wrapping his arms around both his daughters. "Me too, Angel. Me too." In his pocket, James carried one final letter. Not for a future milestone, but for today. To my daughters, on the day I learned that love isn't measured by the hours you work or the money you save. Love is measured by the moments you're present, the hugs you give, and the homework you help with. Today I choose to be visible. Today I choose to be your father. Sometimes the greatest act of love is learning when to stop sacrificing time for security and start investing presence for connection. James Wilson learned that children don't need perfect fathers, they need present ones. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to be vulnerable, we discover we're never as alone as we thought. If this story reminds you to treasure time with the people you love, please share it with someone who needs to hear that presence is more valuable than presence. Have you ever misunderstood someone's actions as not caring, when they were actually loving you the only way they knew how? Tell us in the comments below. Remember, we're all still human, still learning how to love each other better.